Hi, I'm Kevin Jones. I'm the Executive Director of SACIA. It's the Southern African Communications Industries Association. We're a SACWA recognised professional body that work across the events and audiovisual sector. Over the last few years, individuals from various associations in the events and audiovisual sector have put aside their differences to work on the development of an industry-specific scorecard for our sector. Some of those organisations represent individuals, some represent companies. Some think our proposed scorecard goes too far and some don't think it goes far enough. Despite these differences, however, we finally agreed on a document that we feel comfortable sending out to our stakeholders, comment and input, so that collectively, with you, we can develop a scorecard that serves our sector. One of the questions I've been asked since we started our public engagements is why we need an industry scorecard at all. And if we do need a scorecard, why now, when the events and the audiovisual industry has been decimated by this COVID pandemic? The answer is provided in a quote from the Deputy Minister of Tourism, who last week spoke about the need for a clear transformation policy. He was speaking on National Tourism Day, and he said it's a pity that some people have tended to understand transformation in a negative sense of it undermining free market principles and slowing down the momentum of hard-won gains in the broader economy. To the contrary, he said, we as government see transformation as a necessary tool for nation building and social cohesion, which helps us to redress the imbalances of the past. It helps us to ensure that people who were historically excluded from the economy also find a fair share of participation. You'll have heard several politicians, not just the Deputy Minister, but many others talk about build back better. And bearing in mind the statement from the Deputy Minister, the choice is clear. We can either embrace the generic code of good practice, or we can develop our own industry-specific scorecard that serves our needs. In exploring whether we should develop our own scorecard or use the generic scorecard, I'd suggest that the events and audiovisual sector is unique. We tend to have much smaller companies with a low headcount of highly skilled and experienced people. We employ freelancers as our needs dictate, and our revenues tend to fluctuate enormously because our activities are project-based. The generic scorecard is a clumsy tool because it's designed to be used across multiple industries where the structure of the organization is fundamentally different to that we find in both the events or the audiovisual sector. Using the generic scorecard is a bit like using a pipe wrench to remove a nut. A spanner is a far more appropriate tool, and what we are proposing is to use a spanner, to create a spanner that allows us to implement a transformation agenda within our sector that is specific to our needs. We need this to be developed with your input, and it needs to work for all of us. This proposed scorecard covers a variety of event formats, including sport, entertainment, recreation, religious, cultural, business events. It includes film and television productions and audiovisual productions. And in fact, it goes so far as to include events that take place in a virtual environment as well. It's very broad and it cuts across many different industry sectors. And so it applies to any organization that generates more than 50% of their annual turnover from the events or audiovisual sector. Last month, the National Film and Video Foundation released their 2021 Economic Assessment Study that looked at the state of transformation in the audiovisual sector. They concluded that overall there are low levels of inclusion and slow transformation in the industry. This is a particular challenge at higher skill levels within the sector where there is very little transformation. They recognize that the audiovisual sector has made steady progress on the transformation front in terms of employment and management, but there's very limited progress on ownership. Their report specifically highlights the lack of self-sufficient and sustainable Black-owned film enterprises, and it also describes how, beyond the public sector, Black filmmakers and producers often cannot raise or access the funding that they need in order to produce content. Similar research exists in the events industry, where we find high barriers to entry for venues and technical production companies because of the high capital costs involved. There are almost no barriers to entry for event organizers who don't require a high capital investment, but events is a high-risk business, and despite the low barrier to entry, and perhaps even because of it, there's a high failure rate of startup businesses, and transformation in the sector is slow. As with the audiovisual sector, transformation at higher skill levels within the industry is particularly problematic. Black-owned technical production companies find it difficult to raise capital or access private funding, and there's limited opportunity for training and skills development, particularly the business skills required if we want to address the business ownership and management elements within the scorecard. In order to address those challenges, we've taken a long look at the core elements of the BEE scorecard and radically increased the transformation targets for ownership, management control, and skills development. We've also increased the points needed to achieve the various BEE levels, and we believe that by doing so, we will be able to address the challenge of transformation within our sector. Whilst we've published our draft BEE scorecard, it's certainly a work in progress that will be amended based on your feedback. I've linked the draft scorecard in the video description below. I've also linked the generic scorecard. Please download them both and read them. We need our members to collaborate in the development of an industry-specific scorecard that promotes a BEE agenda without throttling the economic recovery of the sector as we emerge from this COVID pandemic. Our sector needs to address historic inequality and create economic opportunity for Black people. We need to promote training and skills development as a tool for economic recovery so that we can accelerate transformation at higher skill levels by creating structured career paths for young people that are entering our industry. We need to encourage cooperation and collaboration between established and emerging, particularly Black-owned businesses. And we need to create opportunities for Black-owned businesses to access funding for CapEx and business development. I want to encourage everybody to participate in the development of a scorecard for our sector so that when we are ready to publish the scorecard in the Government Gazette, we can point to wide industry engagement and participation. This scorecard will impact everybody in our sector, so whether you're a supporter of BEE or not is completely irrelevant. You can either participate in the development of a bespoke scorecard that serves our interests, or you can continue to live with the consequence of a clumsy generic scorecard that has been imposed upon us without any consideration for the structure and the culture of the events and audiovisual sector. The choice is yours. I've included the registration links in the video description below. I hope you'll join us for the webinars and the public engagement, and I look forward to seeing your considered input on the proposals that we've put forward. Thank you very much, and I look forward to working with you on this important project.